National School Choice Week starts January 26th. The following interview was aired previously, but it has a lot of information that can help you learn more about what School Choice Week is, what options you have, and why it's so important in your child's education. So please enjoy this repeat airing of our focus on school choices in Tennessee. Good morning. I'm Anna Marie De La Vega, and this is Focus. Thank you for listening. Now, today we have a lady who's going to be able to talk on all sorts of topics. We're going to start with Hispanic Heritage Month. It's Shelby Doyle. Welcome. Hi there.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So how can you speak on Hispanic Heritage Month? What can you tell us about that and some of the things that are available during that month?
Sure. So I work at a place called the National School Choice Awareness Foundation, and we have a program called Conoce tus opciones escolares, and that is focused on helping the Hispanic community understand what their education options are in any type of school.
And that means in English, you said Conoce tus opciones escolares?
That's right. So know your school options.
Good.
And the mission of the program is to make sure that no matter what language you speak, you can know your school options. In a family that's living today, there's a completely different menu of options than a generation ago.
Really?
With open enrollment in traditional public schools, public charter schools, public magnet schools, private schools, which now have programs that can help families afford them, homeschooling, online schooling, the list is long, and it's a lot to sort through.
Yes. And so the program you're working with helps specifically Spanish-speaking families figure out and navigate this entire process.
That's exactly right. So we have been around for the last 15 years helping families understand these options. But in the last 4 years, we've started putting out more and more information in Spanish because there's a real interest in the Spanish-speaking and Hispanic community in this topic, and not a lot that addresses these questions that oftentimes are more salient for a group of people who are maybe new to the country, new to the infrastructure around education here. They're more comfortable in Spanish in some cases, and so it's bringing that information to them in a way that they can sort through it more easily.
And more fluent. If we moved to someplace where the language was mostly Spanish and we're trying to figure out what to do with our kids and school choices and things like that, we'd want to find a way to get it where we could really dig our teeth into it and figure it out.
Exactly. Even if your native language is English, sometimes the jargon that goes into education feels like another language. So imagine doing that in your second language. It's a lot.
Well, so let's go ahead and go into the school options then, because in any language, as you say, we need to know what it's about. What is, first of all, school choices? What does that mean?
So school choice is the process of choosing the education environment you want proactively for your student. So you might wind up in your zone public school, but if that's something that you've landed on after truly considering those options, we'd say you exercise school choice, because it's not about the destination, it's the journey. And so a lot of times folks think about paying out of pocket for private, going to their zone school, or maybe homeschooling if they have a lot of free time, and that's kind of it. That's really not how the situation is anymore. And a lot of those options that I listed earlier, traditional public, charter, magnet, online, all four of those are in the public school system, which means they're free to attend. And that's something that a lot of folks need to hear.
Okay, tell us what each means and what is available for the student there, and what might make a parent decide, I'm going to take this somewhere else.
So within the public school system, there's your neighborhood public school, but there's also things that are magnet schools or interest-based schools. So it could be something like the language arts or STEM that are desirable schools if your student is either particularly interested in something already, has a strong aptitude, or it's just important to your family.
Okay, and now, before you move on, tell us when you start going STEM and things like that. Tell people what that means so they can follow along with it.
Sure, yeah. So STEM and STEAM are terms you'll hear a lot right now in education. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math is STEAM.
Okay.
And so those indicate that a school is going to be more focused on hands-on technological application, on science, on some of that harder numerical learning than something that might be more focused on the language arts, liberal arts, or arts.
So what would you be trying to get your child prepared for if you went to a school like that versus a liberal arts?
Yeah, so I think for some families, they can tell by early elementary that they have a science kid. That kid is doing experiments in the backyard that may or may not be sanctioned by the parents and may or may not be fun to clean up. But if you have a kid like that and you think, you know what, this is clearly something that they're not only going to potentially be able to have a career in, but that makes them happy and gets them excited to go to school.
Yeah.
That's where you might want to hone in on something like this that has a specialization early, because you know your kid best and you can see those things starting to develop in them and really help them blossom and grow from that early age.
Right. And a magnet school, what is that?
So a magnet school is really similar to what I'm talking about. And magnet schools and these sort of specialized traditional public schools, sometimes they overlap. Sometimes a magnet program exists in a normal public school. So this is one of the hardest things to differentiate. But what makes a magnet school unique is in most cases, they'll have some sort of test you take to get in. Now, that may not necessarily be something that's going to measure whether a student is already really, really knowledgeable about something. It could just be showing aptitude.
Oh.
And a lot of times when you get into high school, it's easier to see this distinction. You'll see magnet schools that are focused on things like the health sciences. So students who are going to go into nursing or become a doctor will be able to start practicing life science, really get in the weeds on anatomy and physiology.
And the rest of the students around them at that entire school still might not if they weren't in that.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. And so this is really helpful if you have a focused kid who is making a real play for a particular career. So as an example, my older sister went to a performing arts magnet school in the city of Houston. She focused on dance, and her whole high school experience included basic core subjects, but was also inclusive of hours of dance training a day.
Oh.
And it's a fantastic option within the public system that's free and allows students who might not have the resources to invest, all of this money a month in these super specialized clubs or skills, but they can do that within their public school and they can become equipped for that next phase of their career.
What was the goal in creating these? I feel like I know, but I want to hear you say this.
Yeah. So you've seen these pop up. So one of the first places they did was in Connecticut. There was actually an interesting backstory here, and it was to promote integration in a lot of cases. It was to make sure that students from all sorts of demographics, when people were self-selecting into different parts of cities or suburbs, to get talented students together from across those lines of difference and get them learning together in the school.
That is great.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives parents of children who have these talents and aptitudes who might not be able to afford lessons, might not be able to afford classes. They can get them to school and they can learn and enhance those talents and aptitudes that they have.
Exactly. I think what I love about this philosophy behind magnet schools is it really is thinking of your K-12 education as getting you ready for the life you want to live, not just checking a box along a path that everybody has to go through exactly the same way. And magnet schools really embody that in a very student-centered way that really is specific to who that student is. And I love that because to me, that's what makes school choice generally work and why it's important is that kids are different and they don't all need the same thing, K-12. And so that's why it's important to have different options available for them.
And I love the fact that you said it keeps them inspired and motivated to go to school, because I think a lot of kids have perhaps one specific goal or dream or the thing that lights them up, that just gives them encouragement to keep going in this world, and they can't really focus on it in school because they're doing all the other blah 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 blah, and they end up leaving school.
It's true, and this is an issue that is top of mind right now. We know that absenteeism is a bit up since the pandemic. It's been tough to get kids back on track and back attending school. When I drive around in my neighborhood in East Nashville, I see a lot of signs that say attendance matters, and I'm betting listeners are too. And that's because we're really trying to remind folks that that's the case. And so having something that sparks that interest in your student is incredibly important. We also know that dropping out disproportionately affects Hispanic families. There's a dropout rate issue with Hispanic families that's far and away above other demographics in the country. And so it's important to do what we can to get kids excited to be in school.
Why is the dropout rate higher?
I think there's a few reasons. There's not, a definitive answer that we can pull out from the data, but we know that in a lot of cases, things like home Wi-Fi access or language barriers can be issues within particularly Hispanic students' experiences.
Well, we're talking with Shelby Doyle. She's the Vice President of Public Awareness for the National School Choice Awareness Foundation. Now, this is a nonprofit?
It is, yes. So we have been around since 2011, and we run the National School Choice Week that happens in January, which is the first thing we came up with to help parents get excited about choosing schools. January, people always say, why are you doing this in January? We're all still recuperating from the holidays and getting our wits back about us. Well, that's because a lot of enrollment deadlines happen right around then. And that's so early. A lot of times parents feel like they sneak up on them once that calendar changes to the new year.
Yeah.
And so we do that in January. And then we also do year-round efforts like this conversation right now in Spanish and in English to help families figure out, whatever they start the process of choosing, what their options are and how to go about choosing.
What is the path to do that? Let's kind of start people in the right direction so they at least know where to begin.
Sure. We always start with a step that I think gets skipped for some families, and that is take a step back and be a little philosophical about why you're going about the school search process. For a lot of folks, unless you're matriculating to kindergarten or middle school, there's a problem you're trying to solve if you're changing schools in, second grade and seventh grade in a lot of cases.
Oh.
And that's fair to keep top of mind. But before you think about where you're going to wind up, it's important to know who you are trying to shape your kid to be and what the North Star is of your family's values.
Wait, the North Star of your family's values. That's great.
Thank you. I think it's important. It's easy to get caught up in what your cousin did that they liked for their kid, what your neighbor across the street said about that one school that they didn't like.
Yeah.
All of that is information that's worth hearing, but it's not going to necessarily be gospel for you. So it's important to get serious about, okay, cutting out all the clutter and the noise. What's important to us as a family? What does my kid need? Not somebody else's kid, but my kid need. Keep that. We encourage you to write it down, put it on your fridge. And so when you get into the weeds of school tours and all these differences you're going to pull out among the schools you're considering, how can you come back and break ties and stay true to what you were trying to get done in the first place?
So you don't get caught up you said in the weeds, so you didn't get caught, well, this has a great athletic program, but if that's not what your kid's going in there for, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It's a great lunch program. No, just doesn't matter. I think that's something that's valid for everybody. We all need to decide who we want to be, where we want to go, and write it down. And I think adults of this generation often were not even taught that to start with.
I think we can sometimes get caught up trying to match what other people we like are doing.
Yeah.
But the inputs that turn into what makes sense for somebody else are going to be totally different for your family. And we hear stories all the time from families who are like, well, I'd kind of written off the school down the street from me because somebody that I knew didn't love it for their kid, or I'd read a news story about some policy they had that I didn't think I agreed with. But when I went to that school, when I toured it, when I talked to the people who run it, I just immediately felt like this was home for my student. And so we really encourage people to be true to who you are and go in with an open mind. If you're not going in with an open mind, then you're going to miss opportunities for your kids.
And are there costs involved in making choices about which school and how you want your kid to be taught?
Well, there can be, but increasingly there are no costs to making school choices. So if you choose, we talked about traditional public schools and public magnet schools. Those are always free to attend. They're public. They're open to all students, although there may not be every seat that everyone wants available in them.
Oh, wait. So what does that mean?
So that means if you're in a particularly selective or popular school, there can be more people who want their kid to attend that school than there are seats available. And there's always, if it's a public school, a very transparent and fair process that has to be followed in order to decide who out of that pool of people actually gets to send their kid there. And for particularly selective schools or schools that have a cap on their growth, that can be a challenge.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't love saying that. I wish there was enough seats for every student who wants to go to every school, but I think it's fair for parents to know that if you're thinking of choosing a popular school.
Definitely.
If that's your top choice, don't be discouraged to put your name on the list. It's not a first come, first serve situation in a lot of cases, but at the same time, you might need to make a backup plan. And that applies in some cases to public charter schools, which are also free to attend. They're different from neighborhood public schools in that they're operated by an entity other than the school district. So they are differentiated in a lot of times in their instructional style, in their approach to how schooling works. So Nashville Classical is one that's down the street from my house. That's a public school. A lot of folks don't realize if they've never set foot inside of it because you think classical school, that must be private, right? Well, no, there's a lot of schools like that in the public system now. There's also, of course, KIPP. There's, some of these names I think people are more familiar with. These are free schools to attend, and they can differentiate within the public system, and they can have different focuses. A big thing for KIPP is college preparation and going on to that higher education point. And so those are also free to attend for students. And then online schooling, which for some folks, they never want to think about again after the pandemic. But on the other hand, there are families who actually really liked their online experience and they want to keep doing it. There are free online public schools in Tennessee as well.
Really? Was that new from pandemic time, or?
They had pre-existed the pandemic in most states. There were about 30 states before the pandemic that had some level of a free public online school, but they have proliferated since the pandemic, as you might imagine. And Tennessee is an interesting state for online learning because in a lot of places, there's maybe one or two online schools that serve the whole state. In Tennessee, online schools are run by school districts. And so there are quite a few that are spread out across the state. There's dozens. There's one that's run by MNPS. And so that's a free school to attend. It's a full-time online education, and it's something that you can apply to from the comfort of your own home and do if you want for your kid.
Wow. Now you've made me think about adult continuing education. Are adults doing this as well? Then why didn't finish 10th grade?
There actually are. You're right to ask that question because the online sector, I think in some ways has been ahead of other types of schools in providing credit recovery and adult education like you're talking about. Because for so many adults with busy lives, they're not going to be able to make it work to do it another way. So there are really cool and innovative programs that do this, especially for young adults with online learning. There's a school I think of called Goal Academy in Colorado that's their whole mission. And it's amazing and makes such a difference in people's lives.
And it would make a difference in your life if you're the parent of a kid you're trying to encourage to stay in school and go on to higher education, and you weren't able to, but now you have the option to.
Yeah, exactly. You can set that example for your child and show them that it is valuable to finish high school. It's worth you even making time as an adult out of your busy life to make that happen.
Okay, so what other kinds of school choices do parents have, and where do they start with them?
So there's two more. There's private schooling and homeschooling. And in Tennessee, private schooling is now more possible for folks in our area, in the Nashville area. If you've heard about an ESA program, ESA stands for Education Savings Account. And this program is happening in 3 counties throughout the state of Tennessee. And the goal of the program is to offset the cost of choosing private schools for parents. So it is a stipend of about $7,000 a year that parents can apply for. You have to not exceed double the free and reduced lunch income level, and you have to live in one of these 3 counties, and your child has to have previously attended public school. But if you meet all those criteria, you can apply for this program and have your tuition fees, school uniforms, transportation, even tutoring can all fall under that stipend of allowable expenses. And so right now there's thousands of kids who are using this across the state.
Whoa.
It's phased in over the last 3 years. So it's been slowly but steadily growing. And that is a new option for families in the area.
Okay. And then the final option?
Homeschooling. So homeschooling has long been, I think, of interest in Tennessee. About 6% of Tennessee students are homeschooled, which is above the national average. I think for those of us in this part of the state, we know that particularly south of town, there's a lot of homeschooling history, a lot of homeschooling interest. I was actually hybrid homeschooled in the Cool Springs area growing up. And so homeschooling is not what you might have thought of in the 90s, where it was mostly particularly conservative families who wanted to do this. That's, of course, still a huge part of the homeschooling world, but it's increasingly of interest to all sorts of families from all sorts of backgrounds across the country. We've seen it grow in a way that it never has in the last 5 years. And it's particularly the highest growing proportion of homeschooling students are Black families, which I think is fascinating. So homeschooling is not necessarily just you and your kids at your house every day anymore. For a lot of families, they're choosing to do hybrid homeschooling, which in most cases means attending a full day of classes 2 days a week and then doing supervised take-home work those other 3 days. And so for families who have a part-time working parent, that can be a great option because they can make both of those things happen.
If teachers have to be licensed and have be accredited and all of this, then how can a parent just go, well, I'm just going to teach my own kid?
That's a really common question about homeschooling. And I think it comes from the concern that we want every kid to get a great education in the country, right? Well, when we look at the data on how homeschool students perform long term, we see that they outperform their peers who have attended other types of schools nationally. And that's been the case for years. And that comes from families where, students were taught by parents who were certified teachers and left to homeschool, or places where students were taught by families who maybe just had a high school diploma. And there's a real range. Some states have more regulations than Tennessee does about, taking a standardized test once a year, and other things like that to kind of allay those concerns. But Tennessee is actually quite liberal in letting homeschooling families determine what they need to do for their students. And I'll say on a personal note, my mother did not have a college education and did homeschool us. And I think she did a good job, though I'm, of course, biased. But I felt prepared when I went to college and all that stuff. So I'm a big believer in it. I don't think any form of schooling is perfect for every kid. And I don't think that everyone should be homeschooled, but I really enjoyed it. It worked well for me. It's also not what my two sisters ended up doing long term. So it really is about the kid.
Have you found that, or do you know, this is could be out of your wheelhouse here. Do you know, are there studies done that show that one form of schooling is better overall for kids, or that they tend to be more socially adept or more comfortable with more contact? Or are there studies that show any better outcomes for kids depending on which schooling they choose?
If you look at the broad body of research we have on kids' outcomes, what we really find is all of the factors, socioeconomic particularly, and other demographics are far bigger predictors of the success of a student academically than anything that's happening in their actual school experience. Now, that's not to say that there aren't schools that can make a huge difference for kids who are disadvantaged. And we know that there are, particularly, for instance, Hispanic students living in poverty are ahead of their peers if they go to a charter school in a lot of cases. But there's almost nothing we can say, generalized to every group, every type of school, they're going to do better here. We know that for a lot of students, their background and their situation in which they start is going to be the biggest factor unless something really intervenes and changes that trajectory.
Wow. What does a parent do to get started?
So once you've gotten clear with you and your family about what you're trying to accomplish in choosing a school, we recommend that you get familiar with exactly what we're talking about, what these types of schools are. For some people, they think, I already have all that figured out, but you may be missing things. You may not realize there's a full-time online school you could attend for free. Just cast a quick, wide search, cast a wide net. You can also search for schools on our website at myschoolchoice.com. There's our school finder tool. There's others on the internet that'll allow you to pull up schools within a radius of you. And we do recommend you do something like that just to kind of catch everything that might be relevant to you. And then from there, we recommend that you go in person to visit these schools. And that, of course, is the most logistically challenging part of this process, because who wants to take the time off of work to go visit 5 schools? But like I was saying, I think it's really important to just be in that space, the energy there and the warmth or lack thereof. How other students seem to be interacting with each other in the halls. All of those things are such important factors for your student. One thing I always say is trust your gut. It's hard to get a gut reading on a place if you're not there, but we do encourage you to start, in the fall if you can, just getting to think about it. A lot of these enrollment deadlines do fall in the winter or early spring.
Okay. Are there checklists that people should be looking for, asking questions they should be asking?
Yeah, so we have some of these on our website at myschoolchoice.com if you want to download worksheets and checklists, because for me, I love having things in my hands on paper and kind of checking things off as I go on a school tour. Some things that are really important are, one, figuring out which questions matter to you. This goes back to finding out your values. You could be the family that wants to have a really long conversation about discipline policy, and there's some right and some wrong answers to you. And if that's you and your family's value, absolutely get in the weeds on that. But you can probably skip some of the other things other people are going to spend time on.
Right.
And so just prioritizing what you're going to ask about. So a couple of key issues that it's good to go in and know how important they are to you are things like discipline, school safety, of course, how time is handled. So having like some schools have very like time sensitive environments where there's deliverables multiple times during a class period.
What is that?
Deliverables being like there's a check-in on learning and a quick quiz, or someone's asked to speak about what you've been going over, and a lot of that like rapid pace and working really quickly to make sure that things are staying on track. And then there's other schools that are way more freewheeling and it's student-led and exploration-based. Those are two very different school environments. You probably have a sense of which one your student would thrive in. Mm-hmm. And so asking about that, asking about things like the health concerns, like how careful are schools about keeping things clean between classes. For some families, that's going to be really important. They're going to want to know what that process is. Other families are happy to trust the process.
Right.
And that's fair too. So it's just about you and as a family. We have a list of everything I'm talking about, so you can kind of go through and strike through or circle, like, I care about that, I don't care about that. But it's as important to know what not to spend your time asking about as it is to what you should spend time asking about.
Why is this organization so passionate about this happening and passionate about parents and families knowing their options?
I think for each of us, there's a personal reason and then there's a big picture reason. My personal reason is that, as I've mentioned, I'm one of three. I attended different schools than my siblings, and we were all in need of something different. And I'm really glad we had the opportunity to do that. And I think it has made each of us who we are. And so on a personal level, I get it. Like, this makes sense to me. It's important that we have options for kids.
Yeah.
On a broad level, I and our organization is passionate about kids having some ownership over their future and parents feeling a sense of empowerment and having a say in what that's going to look like. We want families to feel like their expertise in their kid and their kid's specificities matters. And it should matter.
Yeah.
Because parents know their kids best. And if we're not making them agents of success for their kids, but kind of trying to put everyone on the same conveyor belt, we are missing a huge resource that can contribute towards having that kid be successful in life. Yes,
a huge resource. I like how you think of that. Are there any other thoughts that are important that our listeners hear that I've neglected to ask about?
I'd just say for a lot of folks, if you aren't familiar with school choice at all, there's a lot to look into. If you are familiar with it as a political term, I'd say think about it as a very personal experience you're having. And I hate to see folks on the right or the left make this into a political football, because what we're talking about is the future of a child. What we're talking about is a family deciding something about a member of that family as a team.
Yeah.
And I don't think there are wrong answers when it comes to what a family is going to choose. And so for us, it's not about getting kids out of one type of school and into another, but creating a space where parents feel like it's okay for them to choose what they need to for their kid. And I hope that if you are not actively making a school choice, or you don't have a kid in school, you can support the families in your life and cheerlead them as they go through this process, because it can be scary as a parent, especially if you end up choosing something that is different than the other people in your life.
Oh, yeah.
And having that person's back and being like, hey, I know you love your kid and you're making this decision for a reason, and we think it's going to go great. Just having that support is huge, even if you're not having to make a choice like this yourself.
When parents go to decide on a school for their children or a type of schooling, do many of them, do you think, decide, well, we're going to keep the kid right here in this public school that's right near our house? So are there a lot, do you think, that are informed and have made that as a decision, or not taking their advantage of the school choice option?
So we survey folks about this and we ask them, here, let's say you have all these options. What would you be interested in pursuing for your kid? And traditional public schools are usually the plurality of what people want. So it may not be the majority of what everybody wants, but of the types of schools, it's in the mix for everybody. And I think it should be and always will be. There's a reason we have them. Yeah. They're a huge community and neighborhood resource.
True.
But I think the more that folks are around other people who have seen that and then ended up doing something different, the more permission they're able to give themselves to think outside the box a little bit.
The more permission they're able to give themselves to think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
And give some parents advice about not being overwhelmed or flustered or whatever.
Yeah.
And encourage them a little.
Yeah. So if you're a parent listening to this and you're thinking, I think I might need to do something different for my kids' education, but thinking about going through that process is overwhelming, I'm not sure where to start, we exist to make that process easier for you. You can go to myschoolchoice.com to do everything that I've talked about and make that list of schools, figure out your priorities, and ask the right questions on a school tour. But more importantly than that, know that your expertise and what you know about your kid is the secret sauce that can make this work for your family. And so as you're in these environments, you may encounter other folks who are using jargon or who are talking about things like they have a PhD in education policy, and they might. And that's great. And they have a lot to offer too. But ultimately, you are the judge of what's going to work well for your kid. And your gut and your instinct and your unique knowledge about them is what should guide this process. And so if you offer that and go through these steps, you will arrive at the right decision because you have what you need to make this choice.
Be the secret sauce. Thank you so much. Shelby Doyle, Vice President of Public Awareness with the National School Choice Awareness Foundation and schoolchoiceawareness.org.
Myschoolchoice.com is our parent-focused website where you can go through these steps.
Okay. We'll put those links on our Focus Facebook page. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Make sure you listen again next week. I'm Anna Marie, and that's Focus.